Good morning, gardeners. It's Friday, November 27th, and it is that time of year again. It is the official kickoff of fig cutting season. And just like we always try to do on this channel, we try to improve every year on our methods and get better and better results. And that's what I will be attempting to do today. Now, last year I rooted a whole bunch of cuttings upstairs in my office, and I actually had a pretty high failure rate of about 40%, and I was not happy with that failure rate at all. It was much higher than my previous year. So I am going to take a number of measures to try and identify what the problems were, why I had such a high failure rate last year, and improve upon that this year and get a much higher success rate. And through some analysis and thinking, I believe that I identified 3 problems with my method last year, and I am going to attempt to improve on all of those methods. So after an analysis of the situation, I believe I identified 3 key problems that I need to improve on to get a higher success ratio. And I'm going to outline that 3-step improvement process as follows. The first thing I need to do is reduce rot of the cuttings. And I'm going to attempt to do that with better mix and by reducing the ambient temperatures of the fig cuttings. The second thing I'm going to focus on is increasing rooting potential. In my previous videos, I've used plastic cups to root my cuttings, and the problem with that is they're usually only deep enough to bury about 1 to 2 nodes of a fig cutting. I'm going to use these 4x9 tree pots that you see stacked over here for this round of fig cuttings because I can bury the cuttings much deeper, and I'm going to try to bury 3 to 4 nodes per cutting to double my chances of getting successful roots. And the third thing I want to do to increase my success rate is to reduce the fungus gnat population. To do that, I typically bake my soil and try to kill any overwintering fungus gnat eggs inside, and that works well, but usually in about 3 to 4 weeks or so, some stray gnats will find their way into the house and they will lay eggs in the soil and proliferate. So as well as baking the soil to kill the initial bunch of eggs in the soil, I'm also going to employ some new tricks that I have come up with that I haven't proven yet, but we are going to experiment and see if it helps improve reducing the fungus gnat population. And as usual, the very first thing that we are going to do is sanitize our fig cuttings, and you've seen me do this in the past. All my fig cuttings are sitting in a lasagna pan, and they are soaking in a solution of half tap water and half 3% hydrogen peroxide. And that's why you see all of these bubbles forming. That is the reaction of the hydrogen peroxide disassociating and breaking down into water and oxygen gas. So we leave these in to soak for about an hour, then I'm going to take them out and let them dry, and then while this process is going on, I'm going to show you how I'm going to make my potting mix this year, because it will have to be baked in the oven for an hour and then it needs to cool down for an hour. Rather than make any kind of complicated mix this year, I'm simply going to use this compressed Pro Mix because everybody says how great this stuff is. And it was on clearance at Walmart earlier in the season around Labor Day, so I snagged a couple of compressed cubes of this. So I'm going to use this mainly as my growing medium for the cuttings. Now I'm going to be filling 9 of these tree pots, and because this is a compressed mix, it's completely hydrophobic at this point. There's no moisture in it, and it's difficult to get it hydrated initially. So because it's going to compress so much, with 9 of these tree pots, I'm going to really need more like 13 of these tree pots full of dry mix because it's going to compress down so much. So I'm going to take 13 of these tree pots full and dump them into this 5-gallon bucket. And just to add some drainage to this mix, because it is really heavy in peat moss, I'm going to add additional perlite to each. And this is really going to be my only addition to this mix, so I'm just going to stir this around. And now that the perlite's been mixed in, we're going to have to hydrate the mix. And I'm going to pour in half of this watering can into each, which is about 3/4 of a gallon per bucket. And because this medium is so hydrophobic, it helps to actually hand mix the water in there because it will incorporate it into the mix more quickly. All of the potting mix has been evenly moistened, and now all of these containers are going to go into my oven at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour in order to bake them thoroughly and kill off any fungus, gnat, eggs, or larvae that may be inside of the mix. And then simultaneously, while the mix is baking in the oven, we have our fig cuttings that are sitting on this cooling rack outside in a nice breeze that will be drying out and getting all of that hydrogen peroxide burnt off of the surface. And now that our potting medium has been baked through and thoroughly sterilized, we need to make sure that it has the appropriate level of moisture. And you know that your medium is hydrated properly when you can take your medium and you can feel it, and it is completely, thoroughly moist to the touch and evenly moist. But if I squeeze it together, it will hold together like a snowball, but if I squeeze it very hard, it won't drip water. If I squeeze this medium really hard and it drips a lot of water, then it has been oversaturated. That's not what we want. So this is exactly what we want to see. It's just evenly moist enough that it will hold together in a clump, but it will not drip when you squeeze it very hard. So we filled up all of our tree pots with the damp mix, and now we need to test them for temperature to ensure that they're not still too hot, and we'll cook our cuttings. And as you can clearly see, we are down to about 94 degrees Fahrenheit, which is less than human body temperature. So everything has cooled off more than enough for us to go ahead and plant our cuttings. So as mentioned before, there are 3 target areas that I want to improve on for better success rooting cuttings this year. And the very first point number 1, is to reduce rot. Now I already went over the new potting mix that I'm going with this year. It's basically just the compressed pro mix with a little bit of added perlite for some better drainage, and I made sure that my mix would not be oversaturated. So this mix is ready to go. I believe that the reason why I had such a high failure rate last year was because I went ahead and I rooted my cuttings upstairs in my office, which is by far the warmest room of the house. Throughout the day, it's typically around 78 degrees Fahrenheit, and I think that that was just too hot for the tops of the cuttings, and paired with the heat mat, which was bringing the bottom temperatures up much warmer than that, it was probably just overall too warm of an environment for my cuttings. So what I'm going to do this year is I am going to go with this setup that I have right here in the garage. I'm going to put just a table inside the garage, and I'm going to have my cuttings rooting on that. And the reason why is because now that it's cooling down into the around 40 degrees Fahrenheit at night and only getting up to the 60s or low 70s in the day, and we have a big cooling period coming up next week where we'll only be in the 50s Fahrenheit, my garage is going to be nice and cool consistently. So that will keep the tops of my cuttings nice and cool. And the good thing about that is keeping the tops of the cuttings cool, mold and bacteria have a very difficult time grabbing hold, and rot has a very difficult time taking hold when you're dealing with temperatures in the 50s Fahrenheit. However, we are still going to use our heat mat at the bottom, which is going to encourage rooting by keeping the bottoms of the cuttings significantly warmer than the tops. So overall, we're just going to be lowering our ambient temperatures up top while keeping the bottoms nice and warm by rooting in the garage instead of inside the house where it's much too warm. The second thing that I'm going to be doing to increase my chances of success rooting cuttings is to bury the cuttings in much deeper 4-inch by 9-inch tree pots this year. The goal of this is to bury as many nodes of the cuttings as possible that is reasonable. So here are a couple of fig cuttings. One is a thick one, one is a thin one. Where the wood changes its pattern is called a node. So where you see these dots right here, this is a node, this is a node, this is a node. And on the smaller cutting, this is a node, this is a node, this is a node, 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 node. And it is at those nodes that the cutting is able to produce roots, leaves, and fruits. So here you can see a couple of bumps here. With these 2 bumps, one is the leaf, One is the fig that you'll get later in the season, and these little tiny dots that are all along there, those are where there are potential roots that can come out. So the more nodes that you bury, the better chances that you will get roots. So if all I was to do is bury this node, this is the only potential location where I could get roots. But if I bury these both, that doubles my chances that one of them will root. Same thing with this cutting. Because the node spacing is closer, I could easily bury 1, 2, 3 nodes and have 3 chances of that cutting rooting buried under a medium. So the more nodes you can bury, the better chances that one of them will root successfully for you. So if you've watched my movies in the past, you'll know that I typically root in a cup like this. And I like the clear cups in general because I'm able to monitor the progress of the fig cutting because I'm able to visibly see if and when they root. However, right next to it is one of these 4-inch by 9-inch tree pots. And just look at the difference. So when you bury your fig cutting, you can't place the cutting all the way in the bottom of the cup. You need to leave at least an inch or two, preferably more medium at the bottom, in order for the roots to take hold. So if I were to place this cutting in the cup like normal, I'm only going to wind up with maybe 2 nodes buried. However, on this larger one, I can easily bury 4 nodes or more and have plenty of room at the bottom of this planter right here where there will be soil. So these will allow me to bury much more of the cutting and give me a much greater chance for success when it comes to rooting. One of the added bonuses of using a black container instead of a clear container is I literally cannot see when the cuttings root. So I was always tempted to lift up my cups and check them and disturb them to see if there's roots. Now I literally will not be able to do that. And letting them sit and not disturbing them is best. Now it's time that we plant our cuttings in the pots, and it's very important that you orient them properly. Fig cuttings are directional. You can't bury them upside down. So if you look here, you'll see on every single fig cutting there are 2 bumps. There is a large bump and there is a smaller bump, which is often a bud, and the bud on top is what faces up. So the little bump on top will always face up and point towards the sky, while the larger circle will be oriented on the bottom. So now that we have our cutting oriented in the proper direction with the buds facing up, we are going to plant it in the tree pot. Now in videos in the past with both mine and many other growers, you've noticed that it is characteristic of the growers to make scores or cuts inside of the fig cutting. I am not doing that this year because I have never had any good luck doing that. And I believe that that actually encourages rot. Just like the skin on your bodies is the first layer of defense against bacteria and diseases, having open wounds on your body gives an opening for bacteria and fungi and viruses to get inside your body and make you sick and make an infection. Well, it's the same thing with cuttings. So if you damage this wood, this bark on the outside is the skin of the fig cuttings. So all I'm really doing by scoring this fig cutting is opening up the skin and allowing an entry point for all kinds of nasty stuff to get in and rot the cutting. So we're not going to do that anymore. I'm done doing that. So I filled these 4-inch by 9-inch pots pretty much up to the top with my medium, but I did not compact it down at all. I just put it in and I gave it the old Chef John tappa tappa tappa, where I smacked it on the bottom just to help it settle, but I didn't compact it down. And that is important because at the end we're going to use our fingers to compact it around this cutting. So again, I'm going to bury it up to the 4th node, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to have to push it down to about the middle in between the 4th and 5th node. And since I didn't compact the soil down, it'll be really easy to press through. I'm just going to wiggle it down to about the 4.5 node, the 4.5 node, and I'm just going to take my fingers and press it around the cutting, and that is going to compact the top layer of soil down probably about 2 inches. And it's very important that you have a 1.5 to 2 inch lip at the top of this tree pot, because we have to fill this with a mulch of some sort, and that is going to be one of our tricks to keep fungus gnats out of the soil and also to promote even moisture so you don't get a lot of evaporation in the top layer of soil and your cuttings dry out prematurely. So we're just going to press it down, not too firm, but firmly enough. And pressing it down, I'm winding up with 3 or 4 nodes buried in there very nicely. And you'll see by burying 4 nodes in this tree pot, I'm still going to have plenty of room in the bottom for a soil buffer, for any roots to grow down and form a nice root mass. And by burying 4 nodes, I will still have 1, 2, 3 nodes on top. And that is more than enough nodes to leaf out. So that's why you can't bury the whole cutting. You can't bury the whole cutting because you still need nodes above the soil line in order to leaf out. So burying 4 and leaving 3 exposed will be just perfect. And now that our cuttings are all potted, I'm going to add a little bit of water to them because the warm soil has evaporated a lot more of the water than originally when I gave it the soil test. So in here, I have some filtered water from my refrigerator filter to get all the chlorine out of it that I've allowed to come to room temperature. So I'm just going to take one of these turkey basters, and I find that this is a great measuring tool. The top line represents 1 ounce, which is right here. And I'm going to go to all of these, and I'm going to give them each 2 ounces of water. Let them soak in. Here I just have a simple Sterilite plastic container I bought at Walmart for like $7, and I'm going to put all of my fig cuttings in here. However, if there is one thing that I've noticed from growing fig cuttings indoors for years, it's that fungus gnats, because I put a mulch layer always on top of my plants, they never get inside the top of the plants because they can't get through the 2 inches of stone or sand that I put in there to lay their eggs. They always get in through the bottom. The bottom drain holes tend to stay moist for a very long period of time. So when I always get a fungus gnat infestation, they're always flying out of the bottom of these drain holes. So I got to thinking and I thought to myself, how can I keep the fungus gnats from getting into the bottom drain holes and laying their eggs? Because that's where I have all my problems. And then it hit me. One of the cheapest foods in the world can help me out here. Good old rice. Because rice is so starchy and dry, if I were to line the bottom of this big Sterilite container full of rice and then twist the tree pots into it and bury the drain holes, there would be no way for those fungus gnats to get in there and lay their eggs. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to empty half this bag. Alright, so it turns out I needed the entire bag, but this right here gives me probably about 2 or 3 inches of rice in there. And that rice is going to be excellent at preventing fungus gnats from getting inside of these containers. So I'm just going to take these and I'm going to lightly twist them inside, and there should be absolutely no way for the fungus gnats to get in there and lay their eggs. And now all of the fig cuttings are comfortably inside this container. And you can see them all buried in the rice at the bottom, and hopefully that will keep the fungus gnats out, because I will have an extra bit of trouble this year since I'll be rooting these in my garage where there will be far more pest pressure than inside my house. So I decided I was going to place my cuttings on my heat mat, which is right here, and I'd leave them there overnight. So it's been 24 hours since I put these fig cuttings here. Here you can see what they look like. And the reason why I did this was I wanted to cover them, and I wanted to see how warm it would get in my cool garage with a cover over them. And this is just 0.95 ounce agricultural fabric. And I wanted to do this to get a temperature reading on them. And you can clearly see all the cuttings here, and you'll notice the pot in the middle I purposefully left empty, and I want to do that in order to get a temperature reading on there. So I'm going to sink this probe way down in the bottom. Let's see what kind of temperatures we're dealing with. So I'm at 82 degrees way down in the bottom. Really nice. If I push it down a little bit further, you can see it's getting warmer and warmer as I press it down. But that's okay, because remember, we are only burying our cuttings to about right here where my thumb is. So all I need to do to find that exact point to see how warm the soil is to measure from the bottom of the pot. So I'm just going to stick this up all the way until I get to the top of my finger. And now I can see that's at 87.4 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's where I can expect my very bottom of the cutting to be. So what I'm going to do to lower the temperature is I'm not going to tie that piece of agricultural fabric over the top. I will let them vent, and I'm going to take a new cutting that I just got from somebody called New Jersey Red. I would hate to waste this container right here, so I'm going to fill out that cutting, or that pot with this cutting, and press that down. And this is a simple bag of pea gravel that I bought at Lowe's for $3 or $4. I'm going to use this in the top 1 to 2 inches of all my containers to keep the fungus gnats from getting into the top layers of soil and laying eggs in them. And in this bucket right here is the pea gravel. You can see what it looks like. I put it in this 5-gallon bucket and I filled it up with water and I rinsed all of the sand out a few times. So now I have nice clean pea gravel that I'm going to use to mulch the top of my pots. So despite the warm temperatures at the bottom of the fig cuttings, the tops of the fig cuttings are at a really nice cool 64.1 degrees Fahrenheit, also known as 17.9 degrees Celsius. So as you can see, there's a solid 20-degree difference between the tops and the bottoms of the cutting, which is exactly what we want. So all I'm going to do here is, remember, I don't want it to be quite as warm in here as it was before, but now that all my river rock is down and everything looks great, my pea gravel rather, now that my pea gravel is down and everything looks great, I'm just going to cover this lightly with the agricultural fabric because that will keep light off of the cuttings, which is exactly what we want because we don't want light to trigger budding before the roots develop, and it'll also keep those fungus gnats out of there. So between the pea gravel on top, the rice on the bottom, the fact that I baked my soil, and this little agricultural fabric topper, I should have my best year ever with fungus gnats in theory. And if you're curious where to get a heat mat like this, I have it linked in my Amazon storefront in the video description. So our fig cuttings are done. All we have to do is we have to check in on them every few days and just make sure that the tops of the soil are not completely drying out. And of course, always check the bottom drain holes as well because we don't want to overwater them if the bottom drain holes are still very wet. So everyone, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please hit that like button, and if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe for future updates and more videos like these. If you're curious about anything that I use in my garden, everything I use is linked in my Amazon storefront in the video description. I'd appreciate it if you could use my Amazon storefront links before you begin any of your shopping needs, even if you don't purchase from that store. Thank you all again so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.